from Baltimore, Maryland. Growing up in Baltimore was a great place. I went to public schools in Baltimore, and oftentimes when we think about Baltimore and the public school system, we often have like a very negative kind of connotation about it. But I had the most amazing teachers. I think that when I think about teaching and some of the great teachers that I had, those were my third and fourth and fifth grade teachers were really people that I go back to time and time again when I think about my teaching practice and the way that they were committed to their students. So, we grew up in the Baptist church in Baltimore. My grandparents went to one church that was about, less than a mile from my parents' home church, and then my grandmother on the other side went to another church, and we would, worship and celebrate and together at church services. And it was very formative in terms of thinking about the role of charismatic teaching. And I think that carries into my classroom practice as well. One of the things that students always say that you really come in ready and excited. And I think part of that is being in the real belly of the Black Afro-Christian tradition, where you got to bring something. That the teacher is expected to bring as much to the audience as the audience is expected to bring to the person that's giving you knowledge. I think that I started to go into this field because I had questions, and I wanted to teach, and I wanted my home congregation to think about certain questions that they didn't think about when I was a young guy and a young boy growing up in Baltimore. And so I went into it because I had questions about my faith that I didn't think were always being answered from the pulpit or weren't being answered from the religious leaders who were organizing my community. And so I went there with a set of questions. I went into academia, both undergrad and then to divinity school and then ultimately to the PhD program, asking these questions about African and African American Christian traditions. And I got some answers, right? And I got some but I also got some more questions, right? And I think that the ways in which my scholarship and my teaching impact my faith is that it really forces me to be open to great teachers and to new knowledge, right? I think that in many ways we often think of faith, or some people think of faith, as this kind of closed repository of information that if you could just get access to it, if you could just get it right, that all of these things would work out for you. And I think that sometimes that's how we teach our students, right? We say, if you could just read Shakespeare right, if you could just read Martin Luther King or Luther correctly, that you would then get it all right, and then you could perform on some end assessment and everything would be great. But I've learned that that's not the case, that really good teaching, really good preaching, that the religion and the faith communities that I want to be about, they're not pointing me to some repository of knowledge that once I can consume it and understand it, that I've gotten the key and I can walk away saying it's all done, but that these really rich communities that I'm looking for and that really enliven me are ones that are saying, you're just opening more questions. You're just thinking about more things, that it's just another opportunity for you to push. And I think that makes being involved in religious community somewhat hard. As a teacher, I go back to my home church that I grew up in, and even though maybe some of my religious commitments have changed, and even some of my ideological claims that I may make have shifted and are different from those folks that I grew up with, they were the first place that taught me the importance of asking questions. They were the first place that said, this Bible is this porous and open text that you can read from a lot of different angles. And so now when I go back, they want to hear how I'm reading it. They don't necessarily agree all the time. They don't always, want to hear me for extended periods of times, but they're open because they know that this is a calling, and that this was a calling that they birthed in me, right? That they fed and nurtured. And I appreciate that.